But first, there are thousands of unsolved murders in London, some dating back not just decades, but hundreds of years. The most famous of those, the Jack the Ripper murders.
For more than a century, the shadow of Jack the Ripper has loomed over history as one of the most chilling and baffling mysteries of all time. This infamous serial killer, whose gruesome crimes terrorized London's Whitechapel district in 1888, has captivated imaginations worldwide. Yet his true identity remained locked in the dark until now. After 137 years, the true identity of Jack the Ripper has finally been revealed. Today, we are about to rewrite history and bring long-awaited closure to a haunting enigma. This is the story of Jack the Ripper, finally solved. Let's get started. The historical context of Jack the Ripper. In the late 19th century, the Whitechapel district of London stood as a stark emblem of urban poverty and social turmoil. Nestled in the East End, Whitechapel was a labyrinth of narrow, grimy streets, overcrowded with destitute families, immigrants, and laborers who struggled to survive amid squalid living conditions. By 1888, this district had become a hotspot for crime, disease, and desperation, a breeding ground for the vulnerabilities that would soon be exploited by one of history's most infamous serial killers, Jack the Ripper. The area's grim environment reflected the stark inequalities of Victorian England, where rapid industrialization had spurred economic growth for some, but deepened the plight of the working poor. Whitechapel's population was swollen by recent arrivals, including a significant number of Eastern European Jewish immigrants fleeing persecution, who lived crammed into dilapidated tenements with limited sanitation and scarce employment opportunities. This backdrop of hardship and social neglect created an atmosphere rife with fear and suspicion, setting the stage for a chilling series of crimes that would horrify not only London, but the entire world. The murders attributed to Jack the Ripper occurred over a relatively brief but intensely dramatic period, spanning from August to November of 1888. The killer's reign of terror began with the brutal murder of Mary Ann Nichols on August 31, 1888, followed closely by Annie Chapman on September 8. These initial victims were both local women struggling with poverty and addiction, living on the margins of society. What shocked the public and law enforcement alike was the savage nature of the attacks. The victims were not only killed, but mutilated in ways that suggested the perpetrator possessed anatomical knowledge. The third and arguably most notorious victim, Elizabeth Stride, was murdered on September 30th, followed mere hours later by Catherine Eddowes, whose killing was marked by particularly gruesome mutilations. The final canonical victim, Mary Jane Kelly, was discovered on November 9, 1888, in her own lodgings, with injuries so horrific that they seemed to epitomize the killer's brutal signature. These 5 murders, often referred to as the Canonical Five, are the crimes most widely accepted by historians and criminologists as the work of the same individual, although speculation has linked other unsolved murders in the area to the Ripper's shadow. The social impact of these murders on Victorian society was profound and far-reaching. Whitechapel's already precarious reputation as a dangerous and undesirable quarter was amplified by the violence and mystery of the killings, feeding into the broader anxieties of a society grappling with rapid urbanization and class divisions. The murders exposed the stark inequalities faced by the urban poor and ignited public debate about the failures of social policy, policing, and health care for marginalized communities. At the same time, the case triggered a media frenzy that would become a defining feature of the modern crime story. Newspapers of the era, fueled by competition for readership, sensationalized the murders with lurid headlines, speculative theories, and often racist or xenophobic undertones aimed at Whitechapel's immigrant population. The press coined the chilling pseudonym Jack the Ripper after receiving a letter supposedly from the killer himself, which many now believe was a hoax, but which nonetheless captured the public imagination. This media storm not only heightened public fear, but also pressured the Metropolitan Police to intensify their investigations, despite the limited forensic tools and investigative methods available at the time. The police investigation into the murders was hampered by the period's rudimentary forensic science, inadequate policing resources, and the complex social dynamics of Whitechapel itself. The Metropolitan Police, along with the City of London Police, conducted numerous interviews and raids, but faced immense difficulties in gathering reliable evidence or securing credible witnesses. The chaotic nature of Whitechapel's streets, combined with widespread distrust between residents and law enforcement, meant that many potential leads went cold. The murderer's ability to evade capture sparked widespread speculation, conspiracy theories, and accusations that ranged from local residents to prominent figures of the era, including doctors and even members of the British aristocracy. This aura of mystery only deepened the public's obsession with the case, inspiring countless books, plays, and later films, turning Jack the Ripper into a dark mythic figure symbolizing the unknown and the terrifying underbelly of Victorian London. Historically, the Ripper murders reveal a snapshot of a city in flux and a society struggling to cope with modernity's rapid changes. But of course, the poor care little about how the world is changing. This was also true at the time. After all, for them, the world was just as cruel, if not more. Victims of Jack the Ripper. The chilling saga of Jack the Ripper is inextricably tied to the tragic lives and brutal deaths of 5 women, known collectively as the canonical 5 victims. Each of these women was a resident of London's East End, struggling against poverty and hardship in the overcrowded, grim streets of Whitechapel. Marianne Nichols, the first of the canonical 5 victims, was found murdered on the morning of August 31, 1888, in Bucks Row, now Durward Street. She was a 43-year-old woman who had endured a life of hardship, having lost her husband and struggling with alcoholism. Nichols had been living in and out of workhouses and was known to frequent the impoverished areas of Whitechapel. On that fateful morning, she was found lifeless, with signs that would soon become a horrific hallmark of the killer. Her murder shocked the community, marking the beginning of a dark chapter in London's history. Just over a week later, on September 8, 1888, Annie Chapman was discovered in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. Chapman was 47 years old and, like Nichols, faced a life scarred by poverty, addiction, and family breakdown. She had recently lost her husband and was living in a common lodging house, trying to support herself through occasional work and prostitution, a common means of survival for many women in Whitechapel. Her murder was notably more gruesome. The savage nature of Chapman's murder suggested the killer had anatomical knowledge, fueling public speculation and fear. The murders of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes on the night of September 30, 1888, intensified the terror gripping London. Elizabeth Stride, often known by her alias Long Liz, was 44 years old and a Swedish-born escort who lived in Whitechapel. Unlike the other victims, Stride's murder was less mutilative. This anomaly led investigators to speculate that the killer might have been interrupted or forced to flee prematurely. Stride was found in Dutfield's yard, off Burner Street, and her murder raised questions about whether all the Whitechapel murders were connected. Catherine Eddowes, murdered just 45 minutes after Stride on the same night, was 46 years old and of Irish descent. Her life, like those of the other victims, was marked by poverty and hardship. Eddowes was found in Mitre Square in the City of London. distinguished by more brutal mutilations than any prior victim. The fact that these two murders occurred so close in time and location suggested a terrifying spree, amplifying public panic and overwhelming the police forces. The final canonical victim, Mary Jane Kelly, was discovered on November 9, 1888, in her room at 13 Miller's Court, Dorset Street. Kelly was the youngest of the victims at just 25 years old and was believed to be a local escort who had lived a turbulent life marked by poverty and instability. Her murder was the most gruesome and personal. The mutilations were far more extensive and savage than previous killings. Unlike the others, Kelly was killed indoors, giving the killer far more time to inflict his terrible signature. What linked these 5 murders unmistakably were the signature mutilations that bore the hallmark of the same perpetrator. The killer appeared to be not only brutal, but methodical, possibly possessing anatomical or surgical knowledge. These grisly mutilations led the press and investigators to label the unknown assailant Jack the Ripper, a name that has since become synonymous with terror and mystery. So, what do we know about the killer based on these facts alone? Rest assured, his identity will be revealed in the end. But we need to look at things as his contemporaries saw them first. Modus operandi of the killer. The killer's ability to move unnoticed through the darkened streets of Whitechapel suggested a man who either lived locally or spent enough time in the area to study its geography and rhythms. The choice of targets, female escorts, was not arbitrary. These women were among the most socially and economically marginalized individuals in Victorian London. They worked at night, often alone, in poorly lit areas, and due to the nature of their profession, they were accustomed to entering secluded spaces with strangers. The Ripper exploited these circumstances, identifying women who were isolated, likely desperate for money, and unlikely to resist or raise alarm once lured into a dark alley or courtyard. The killer's approach appears to have involved a careful selection process, observing his potential victims from a distance or engaging them in brief conversation to ensure they met his preferred profile. He seemed to possess the patience and control to watch, without acting, until the perfect opportunity arose. It's likely that he blended in with the local population, making him inconspicuous. He may have possibly even looked respectable or unthreatening enough to disarm suspicion. Once he identified a target, he would wait for a quiet moment when no witnesses were nearby. This careful timing is evident from the fact that many of the attacks occurred just minutes before the bodies were discovered, suggesting that the killer worked quickly and precisely and always chose a window of minimal risk. The murder of Elizabeth Stride on the night of September 30th, 1888, for example, is believed to have been interrupted, possibly by a passerby, resulting in a killing that lacked the usual mutilation. This implies that the Ripper preferred not to be rushed, operating with a methodical pace once he had privacy. What's also evident is that Jack the Ripper used the layout of Whitechapel to his advantage. The district was a warren of alleys, courts, backyards, and lodging houses, ideal for disappearing quickly after a crime. This urban topography allowed the killer to vanish into the shadows within moments. Investigators at the time were often frustrated by how little physical evidence was left behind, indicating that the killer had planned escape routes, or at least knew how to use the chaotic environment to stay ahead of the police. The fact that all 5 canonical victims were killed within a few minutes' walk of each other also reinforces the theory that the Ripper had a psychological or physical tie to the area. He didn't roam randomly across London. Instead, he operated in a compact zone where he felt comfortable and in control. Another recurring element of the Ripper's behavior was the way he often struck during weekends or near the end of the month, a curious pattern that led some researchers to theorize that he might have had a day job, or that his actions were tied to some kind of internal calendar. Perhaps more telling is the calculated emotional detachment required to repeatedly commit such acts, as well as the restraint shown in escaping without detection or self-sabotage. He was never seen fleeing a scene, never caught in possession of bloody clothing or a weapon, despite heightened public vigilance and increased police patrols after the second murder. This suggests that he not only planned each attack, but also made an effort to ensure he could disappear cleanly afterward. The selection of victims, typically older women with hard lives and little social support, also suggests that the Ripper may have harbored a specific contempt or fixation with this particular demographic. Some modern criminal profilers propose that his killings were not just crimes of opportunity, but acts rooted in misogyny, possibly fueled by personal trauma or a deranged ideology. The killer's ability to form a connection just long enough to lure the women into a trap, followed by swift and savage action, reveals the chilling duality of someone who could appear normal on the outside while harboring violent instincts. Furthermore, the Ripper's method included a chilling element of staging the crime scenes. While the murders were brutal and frenzied, the positioning of the bodies and the specific organs removed suggested a ritualistic or symbolic aspect. Some experts have argued that the removal of certain organs, such as the uterus or kidneys, could have been intended as a macabre signature or message, possibly reflecting the killer's psychological motives or symbolic animosity toward women. The intense mutilations also made it clear that the killer's violence went beyond mere murder. It was an expression of deep-seated rage or pathology, aimed at degrading and humiliating the victims in death. Naturally, this brutal murder spree created an overwhelming sense of fear throughout London. The police, led by Chief Inspector Frederick Aberline, were both baffled and horrified by the precision and savagery of the murders. Despite intensive investigations, the killer's identity remained elusive, largely due to the covert nature of the attacks and the social chaos of Whitechapel. The press played a significant role in amplifying the terror, with sensationalized reports that emphasized the grotesque details of the mutilations and speculated on the killer's medical expertise. But what did the investigators find out? Initial investigation and challenges. From the outset, the investigation was complicated by jurisdictional issues, as the murders spanned areas policed by both the Metropolitan Police and the City of London Police. The first canonical victim, Mary Ann Nichols, was found in Bucks Row, Whitechapel, which was under the Metropolitan Police's jurisdiction. However, Elizabeth Stride's murder occurred in Dutfield's Yard, a part of the City of London's territory. This division required coordination between the two police forces, which was not always seamless. The overlap sometimes led to communication gaps and conflicting theories, adding to the difficulty of forming a coherent investigation strategy. Despite these challenges, Chief Inspector Aberline, a seasoned detective with experience in high-profile cases, took a leading role in the efforts to capture the killer. The limitations of forensic science during the late 19th century were among the greatest obstacles in the hunt for the Ripper. The modern tools of crime scene investigation, such as fingerprinting, DNA analysis, and sophisticated forensic pathology, were either in their infancy or non-existent. Fingerprinting, for example, was not yet a routine part of police work in London at the time, and DNA would not be discovered for almost a century. Crime scenes were often contaminated by onlookers, reporters, and even police officers themselves, further reducing the chances of preserving any physical evidence. Photographic documentation was used but limited, and medical examinations were constrained by contemporary knowledge, which meant the nuances of the killer's anatomical precision could not be fully exploited for clues. Witness testimonies became a cornerstone of the investigation, though their reliability was frequently questionable. Many residents of Whitechapel were impoverished, transient, or mistrustful of the police, complicating efforts to gather accurate information. Additionally, the early hours of the murders meant that few witnesses had a clear view of the assailant. Several key eyewitness accounts described a suspicious man seen with victims shortly before their deaths, but descriptions varied widely. with some reports noting a man of average height and dark clothing, while others suggested different physical characteristics. One of the most famous witnesses was Israel Schwartz, who claimed to have seen a man assaulting a woman near Berner Street shortly before Mary Jane Kelly's murder, but his statement was discounted for inconsistencies. These unreliable or conflicting accounts hampered the police's ability to create a definitive profile or identify a suspect. Public panic played a significant role in shaping the investigation's atmosphere. The murders sparked a media frenzy, with newspapers across Britain and beyond sensationalizing the grisly details and fueling widespread fear. The press eagerly published letters purportedly from the killer, the most famous being the Dear Boss letter, signed Jack the Ripper, which gave the killer his infamous nickname. The intense public pressure on the police led to numerous tips and accusations flooding in, but many of these were based on rumor, hysteria, or the desire for notoriety rather than concrete evidence. Throughout the inquiry, an overwhelming number of suspects were proposed, ranging from local butchers and surgeons to prominent figures such as artist Walter Sickert, and even members of the British royal family, including Prince Albert Victor. The suspect list included Montague John Druitt, a barrister found drowned shortly after the last canonical murder, Aaron Kosminski, a Polish barber confined to an asylum, and Michael Ostrog, a convicted criminal and alleged medical knowledge holder. Despite these theories, no suspect was ever definitively linked to the crimes, leaving the case unresolved. So, why was Jack the Ripper never apprehended? Firstly, the forensic tools available at the time were simply inadequate for identifying or tracking a serial killer who left little physical evidence. The absence of fingerprinting and DNA evidence meant investigators had to rely heavily on circumstantial evidence and often unreliable eyewitness accounts. The transient nature of the population, coupled with the lack of street lighting and the labyrinthine layout of alleys and courtyards, gave the killer ample opportunity to escape undetected. Moreover, the killer may have possessed insider knowledge of police procedures or anatomy, helping him evade capture. The precision of the mutilations suggested familiarity with human anatomy, possibly indicating a surgeon, butcher, or someone with medical training who understood how to disable victims quickly and avoid drawing attention. The killer's ability to strike repeatedly in a high-risk urban environment without leaving a trace suggests a level of cunning and possibly premeditation that made him extraordinarily difficult to catch. But today, things are different. The recent DNA breakthrough. The story of Jack the Ripper took a fascinating new turn in the 21st century, thanks to the determined efforts of historian Russell Edwards, whose groundbreaking use of modern DNA analysis reignited hopes of finally unmasking the elusive killer. Edwards, an English historian with a deep interest in the Whitechapel murders, embarked on a quest to apply contemporary forensic science to the century-old mystery, hoping to identify the notorious murderer through genetic evidence extracted from historical artifacts linked to the crimes. At the heart of this investigation was a seemingly ordinary item, a shawl belonging to Catherine Eddowes, one of the canonical 5 victims of Jack the Ripper. The shawl was said to have been found near her mutilated body and passed down through various private collections over the decades. Russell Edwards acquired this shawl in 2007. Though its provenance was disputed and questioned by some experts, Edwards proceeded with the belief that the fabric might contain biological traces directly linked to the killer. Edwards collaborated with Dr. Jari Louhelainen, a molecular biologist specializing in forensic genetics at Liverpool John Moores University, to examine the shawl for evidence. They focused on analyzing blood stains and possible semen stains present on the fabric, which had miraculously survived the passage of time despite the shawl's age and exposure to less than ideal storage conditions. Using mitochondrial DNA testing, a technique capable of analyzing degraded and minute genetic material, they successfully extracted two distinct genetic profiles. One profile matched descendants of Catherine Eddowes herself, providing strong support for the shawl's authenticity as an item connected to the victim. The other DNA sample, more tantalizing, matched the maternal lineage of Aaron Kosminski, a Polish Jewish immigrant and barber surgeon who had long been suspected in some quarters as Jack the Ripper. Aaron Kosminski had lived in the Whitechapel district during the time of the murders and was known to have had schizophrenia, a mental illness that manifested in paranoid delusions and violent tendencies. Importantly, Kosminski's occupation as a barber and hairdresser would have provided him with the anatomical knowledge shown by the killer. He was admitted to the Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum in 1891, where he remained until he died in 1919. His institutionalization coincided with the end of the Ripper murders, which further fueled suspicions about his possible involvement. What lent historical weight to these suspicions was a memorandum written in 1891 by Sir Melville Macnaghten, then Assistant Chief Constable of the Metropolitan Police, which listed Kosminski as a strong suspect. Macnaghten described him as a man with homicidal tendencies who was a person of unsound mind and likely responsible for the murders, although the evidence at the time was circumstantial and inconclusive. The significance of Edwards's DNA breakthrough lies not only in matching genetic material, but also in the involvement of living descendants who provided DNA samples for comparison. This modern genealogical approach, combining family lineage tracing with forensic analysis, marked a revolutionary step in cold case investigations. Descendants of both Eddowes and Kosminski were located through painstaking genealogical research and voluntarily submitted mitochondrial DNA samples, which were then matched to the profiles extracted from the shawl. The mitochondrial DNA used in the study, inherited through the maternal line, provided a more stable and traceable genetic marker, albeit less specific than nuclear DNA. This approach allowed researchers to establish a plausible genetic link between the evidence and the historical figures connected to the case. Despite the excitement surrounding the findings, the scientific community and true crime experts have approached the conclusions with cautious skepticism. Critics have questioned the provenance of the shawl itself, raising doubts about whether it was genuinely present at the crime scene or contaminated at some point over its 130-year history. The mitochondrial DNA analysis, while groundbreaking, cannot definitively prove that the DNA came from the killer rather than an unrelated individual who had contact with the shawl. Moreover, given the crowded, unsanitary conditions of Victorian London and the shawl's long and undocumented custody, contamination is a real possibility. Even so, the research has undeniably brought a new level of scientific inquiry to the Jack the Ripper case, transforming what was once purely speculative into a matter that can be investigated with the tools of modern genetics. In fact, this is not the only case that has benefited from DNA testing. The role of forensic DNA testing in solving cold cases. The genesis of DNA forensic science in criminal justice is often traced back to 1986 with the landmark Colin Pitchfork case in the United Kingdom, which marked the first time DNA evidence was used to convict a murderer. Pitchfork was found guilty of the assault and murder of two teenage girls, Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth, in Leicestershire, England, after DNA samples collected at the crime scenes were matched to him. This breakthrough not only secured justice in that particular case, but also ushered in a new era of forensic science, where genetic profiling became a critical investigative tool. Since then, forensic technology has advanced at a remarkable pace, allowing experts to extract and analyze genetic material from increasingly old, degraded, or contaminated evidence. Early DNA tests required relatively fresh biological samples, But modern techniques, such as mitochondrial DNA analysis, polymerase chain reaction or PCR amplification, and next-generation sequencing have expanded the possibilities dramatically. These advancements enable scientists to examine tiny traces of DNA found in items such as hair follicles, bone fragments, blood stains, or even personal effects preserved for decades or centuries, allowing us to reopen cold cases and examine artifacts that were previously considered too fragile or contaminated to yield usable genetic data. The murders attributed to Jack the Ripper occurred in 1888, long before the advent of DNA science, and the evidence available was limited to eyewitness accounts, rudimentary police reports, and a few physical artifacts that survived the intervening years. However, with modern forensic techniques, historians and scientists have been able to analyze items linked to the crimes and attempt to extract biological evidence that might identify the killer. The role of DNA testing in solving cold cases extends well beyond high-profile historical cases. Across the globe, law enforcement agencies have harnessed forensic genetics to reopen and resolve thousands of cold cases involving everything from unsolved homicides to assaults and disappearances. Cold case units frequently rely on new DNA technologies to re-examine evidence stored in archives, sometimes discovering genetic profiles that match suspects previously unknown or confirming the innocence of those wrongfully accused. This has led to numerous exonerations, as well as the apprehension of serial offenders who might have escaped justice for decades. Forensic DNA testing has also been instrumental in developing large databases such as the Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS in the United States, established in the 1990s, which facilitates the comparison of DNA profiles across jurisdictions. These databases enable rapid identification by matching crime scene DNA to profiles of convicted offenders or arrestees, significantly enhancing the ability to solve crimes quickly. The creation and expansion of such databases have been a key factor in the successful resolution of many cold cases that were once considered hopeless. Additionally, the rise of genealogical DNA testing has opened another dimension in forensic investigations. By comparing crime scene DNA to publicly available genetic databases used by individuals tracing their ancestry, investigators have been able to identify suspects through familial matches. This technique famously helped identify the Golden State Killer in California in 2018, decades after his crimes. It involves searching for partial DNA matches that indicate relatives of the unknown perpetrator, followed by traditional genealogical research to narrow down the suspect pool. This innovative use of DNA technology has rapidly become a powerful tool for solving cold cases where direct matches are unavailable. However, the use of DNA in cold case investigations is not without challenges. The quality and preservation of evidence from older cases can vary widely, and contamination, both accidental and intentional, remains a concern. Additionally, the ethical and privacy implications of expanding DNA databases and genealogical searches are topics of ongoing debate. Despite these issues, the overwhelming benefits of forensic DNA testing in solving cold cases are undeniable. For instance, by revealing the identity of Jack the Ripper, the researchers have offered an extraordinary sense of emotional closure for the descendants of the victims. More than a century after their ancestors' brutal murders, families could finally see a glimmer of resolution in a mystery that had haunted their heritage. The confirmation of Kosminski's DNA on the shawl, if accepted widely, meant that history could definitively name the man behind the grisly crimes that terrorized Victorian London. For many, this was not just about academic interest, but about honoring the memory of Marianne Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, collectively known as the canonical 5 victims, and acknowledging their suffering and humanity. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.